The traitorous African leader, Colonel Gaddafi, played a crucial role in the overthrow of the previous despot in Libya. His efforts had far-reaching effects on the entire area in addition to changing the political climate in Libya. This African leader, who had previously been a close supporter of Gaddafi, eventually turned against him and joined the forces trying to topple the government. Welcome to the Afro page. Before starting our discussion, there is a small reminder. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, don't forget to subscribe and press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any newly uploaded videos. Now, let's move on. Muhammad Gaddafi was just one of the continent's rulers who had a profound influence. He had a life of self-reinvention and is best known for advocating for the United States of Africa. Muhammad Gaddafi had high hopes for both his nation and Africa, even after 40 years of rule. Ultimately, though, it was this very president, the one he regarded as a friend, who had misled him. So, now we move on to Uganda, and the leader who betrayed Gaddafi was none other than the Ugandan leader who propagated his treason. Uganda's president, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, chastised the United States and the African Union in a 2016 letter for their interference in Libya and the wider Middle East. He added that Saddam Hussein of Iraq and Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi should not be overthrown by the United States or the European Union. However, what made President Museveni turn on Gaddafi? Let's examine how they even became close to one another before delving deeply into the reason. Gaddafi had been Uganda's longtime friend. His bond with this nation, which he held in such high regard, dates back to the Idi Amin era of the 1970s. He gave this country a great deal of morale, financial, and military assistance during this time for Amin's government. However, he would soon discover that all of his companionship and assistance were betrayed. Amin left the nation in 1979 for Libya, where he eventually relocated and established himself in Saudi Arabia, having faced numerous attacks and acts of defiance against him. Following Amin's ouster in 1980, Uganda decided to hold elections to select a new leader. Museveni would do whatever any other power-hungry individual would do because the outcome did not favor him. He declared that it was unfair to say that the elections had been manipulated. This led to a civil war between Museveni and the other opposition leaders in Uganda. During this conflict, Museveni and his army were lacking in both arms and ammunition. He only asked the US and the UK for assistance with armaments. Since he was connected to Gaddafi, his request was declined. He then visited Gaddafi, his nation's closest supporter. Gaddafi never thought twice. Gaddafi provided all the assistance he required. He supplied him with military equipment, and he won. After Paul Kawanga Samogarere was defeated, Museveni's military received training from Libya. Museveni went so far as to name his covert intelligence organization after its Libyan equivalents. One would believe that Gaddafi considered Uganda to be his second home given how often he traveled there. Throwing away the Libyan African portfolio, Gaddafi purchased 51% of Uganda Telecom, the country's telecom company, and 60% of Tristar Limited, a textile company. In addition, Gaddafi placed enormous bets in Uganda's real estate and financial industries, investing in numerous businesses such as the Tropical Bank of Africa, Lake Victoria Hotel, and National Housing Incorporation, along with many more. You should also be aware that Gaddafi supported the ERPF rebels after they invaded Rwanda in 1980 by way of Museveni. He provided them with support, including weapons that the Museveni government flew into Uganda. Their bond was that deep, which is why the betrayal hurt much more. Gaddafi's influence on the Muslim population in Uganda is still felt today. He made an important contribution to the building of the spectacular mosque there. This is considered to be Southeast Africa's second biggest mosque. Let's examine Gaddafi's interest in the Kingdom of Turo as well. In 2001, Muhammad Gaddafi became interested in this kingdom inside the borders of Uganda. Most of the developments there, including Turo Palace's construction, were funded by Muhammad Gaddafi. Gaddafi helped Museveni carry out his campaigns in the presidential elections of 2001 and 2006. What was the real reason behind Museveni's betrayal of Gaddafi? Let's look at this in two main sections: the goals of Muhammad Gaddafi and Western interests. Muhammad Gaddafi is the most frequently mentioned figure whenever the concept of a United States of Africa is brought up, as you may already be aware. Gaddafi invested an extensive amount of work into bringing Africa together. In 1989, Gaddafi was able to persuade 45 heads of state to endorse the establishment of an African Union, which took the place of the African Union Organization. After this, Gaddafi was the most well-liked supporter of this union for over a decade. Nevertheless, he developed the concept of the United States of Africa in 1989, imagining it to have an integrated military as well as currency. During Gaddafi's rule, Libya supplied almost 15% of the funding for African Union programs. However, several African leaders and Western powers found this to be a frightening proposition, believing it would undermine their standing, influence, and status on the continent. Divides arose among African leaders over the notion. Unexpectedly, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni opposed this notion as well. Gaddafi had previously given Museveni a lot of assistance and even helped him rise to a position of great influence in Uganda. He had supported his nation in its hour of need and made significant investments in it. For what reason did Museveni reject Gaddafi's proposal to establish the United States of Africa? At first, it created a challenge to his leadership in Uganda. He wasn't going to bow down to another leader's authority. Second, Museveni was starting to have considerable influence in the area, and because of this, he acted militarily in nations like Somalia to further Western interests. He also gave the CIA chiefs intellectual support. He put the interests of the West ahead of those of his fellow Africans. Museveni aggressively refused this decision when it was eventually brought up at an African Union conference in Accra, Ghana, in 2007. He was afraid that endorsing the notion of African unification would lead to conflicts with the Western countries. Museveni was also worried about the consequences of betraying Gaddafi, both financially and militarily. However, when his son was graduating from high school in the United States on June 13, 2008, Museveni gave his approval to Jende Fraser, the Assistant Secretary General of State for African Affairs. He claimed that because of the language and cultural divide, he did not think a united Africa was essential. He went on to claim that Gaddafi prevented tiny African nations from speaking out at the African Union and other international events by bribing them to back him. Museveni's leadership considered Gaddafi's 2008 unexpected visit to Uganda as a planned assassination attempt on their president. In a 37-minute speech at an Arab youth gathering in Uganda, Gaddafi changed his tone, stating that in order to carry out his goals for the United States of Africa, he now preferred to collaborate with traditional leaders rather than elected presidents. He convened a group of traditional African leaders in 2009 to talk about the continent's unification. Museveni discovered this and prevented Gaddafi's traditional rulers from going to the conference. Gaddafi had been convinced by Museveni that George W. Bush, the U.S. president at the time, had lifted sanctions against Libya and would invest in his nation if he eliminated his weapons of mass destruction. This was the biggest error that ultimately caused Gaddafi to fall. He lacked a potent nuclear bomb capable of wiping out NATO forces. Since then, Museveni has made an effort to assume Gaddafi's position and promote financial and security cooperation among African nations. Although he has certain strengths, he lacks the financial resources and charisma necessary to complete this mission. For the same reason that they opposed Gaddafi, even the West will not. Museveni stated in a speech in 2021 that the Western powers had limited goals, and ironically, it turned out that these were the same people he had sold Gaddafi to. 2 years after Gaddafi's fall, the mosque that had been constructed in Uganda and called the Gaddafi Mosque changed its name in order to satisfy the government at the time. That brings us to the end of the video. Thank you for being to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and tell us what you think about this video below in the comments section. Let's meet again with another interesting video.